Hi and welcome to my first video series for One at Once, which is called Improving Your Exploit Skills. Before I go into more details about what I want to cover in this video series, I would like to give a short introduction about myself. I play under the screen name DjuNKeLL. I'm 27 years old and I live in the Netherlands. My main game is DjuNKeLL Zoom Cash, and I started to add some MTMDs during March this year, and after like 3 weeks I was lucky enough to win the big 22 on a Sunday, which was kind of nice for my bankroll and definitely gave it a little boost, and also got me more excited about MTTs in general. Now currently I am a mix of an MTT and a cash game player. In general, my game evolves more around exploitative poker because I tend to pay close attention to action, be observant, and try to make a lot of notes and try to see if my opponents have certain patterns, tendencies or leaks, and in general try to exploit that by making the right adjustments. I feel it's important to be a little bit transparent as a coach, so I will also show you my graph of DjuNKeLL Zoom this year, so you can see that here, and these are my results for tournaments which I started to play this year. So the goals for this series, the main goal is to improve the exploitative part of your poker game by showing some of my tools and systems I built along the way, and that is basically divided into several subsections, like being observant and how to process information, make a lot of notes and try to make them as effective and efficient as possible, building accurate player profiles, so really try to get an accurate view on what kind of tendencies, patterns and leaks your opponents have based on all the observations and notes you take on your opponent. And from there, once you have the player profile, you should also make the correct adjustments. And the last thing is also using different color coding system to make quicker adjustments. And the second thing is that I also, of course, will explain the general thought process. So that will basically cover my playstyle, my hand reading, how I build my ranges, and how I generally think about poker and approach poker. So what's next for this video specifically? I will first continue with a short presentation about what my view is on GTO and exploitative poker in today's games. And after that I will go over the footage of a DjuNKeLL Zoom recorded sessions. I decided to make a new database without notes because I rather want you to show the process of making notes and being observant and trying to build reads on your opponents and make certain adjustments, rather than showing you the end result where I just show all my notes which I made during this year and how I would adjust against my opponents. It's definitely very beneficial for you as a member to see the end result of my notes and what kind of adjustments I would make. So for now I'm considering doing hand history review, where I will go over my notes and show you how I make specific adjustments against my opponents in specific hand history reviews. The second thing is I also will expose too much information. I feel that's pretty straightforward, because when I pop up the notes on different regulars, I will show a lot of information and a lot of valuable information for me. And the third thing is also that it doesn't really feel good from a moral perspective to give away that information on the net on my opponents, although it's definitely, of course, my view and my opinion on how my opponents play or how I perceive my opponents to play, but I still feel it's just not going to be a good thing to do that. So about GTO and exploitative poker. So the first thing I wrote down is that it's not versus, and what I mean by that is that I feel that GTO and exploitative poker are pretty well mixed together. My view on GTO, when I decided to study GTO intensively around 6 months ago, well, there was definitely what you could see as a GTO boom, where GTO become really famous. is that I wanted to build my ranges post-flop using several models, for example Cardwin and ZV, to make them as unexploitable as possible for my opponents. But if you want to build your ranges post-flop in such a way, then it always translates to earlier streets, whether you go from river to turn to flop, and in the end it translates back to pre-flop hand selection. So what I did back then is really study my pre-flop ranges a lot and how I wanted to have ranges which are fairly solid and which I will be opening as a default. So that way, when I was continuously playing the same ranges over and over again, I would know which kind of hands I would be entering a pot post-flop. And from there, it was much easier for me to build my ranges post-flop and know where I was at in my ranges. And basically, that way I felt was really good for me to understand GTO more and how to apply it in practice. So for me, as how I view it today, is that GTO, and basically what that means is default ranges, is really the starting point of my poker game. So before I start my session, and for example I would play 5 unknown opponents, I think it's a very good idea to have a game style which is fairly hard to exploit for your opponents, and where you are pretty comfortable saying to yourself that you feel safe about them and you feel that they are solid and you know how to apply them in practice. But obviously when you play poker, a lot of information becomes available for you, and that this can of course be anything like your observation, but also like hot stats, screen names. If someone is playing with a shorter stack, it can be anything. So once you see information and you feel you should make an adjustment because you can play a more profitable strategy than your default strategy, at that point I feel you should definitely try to exploit and not hang on to your default ranges. So that's kind of the approach I have in GTO and exploitive poker. And I wanted to also explain this a little bit more in detail in this process model I made. So again, you start with a game plan, which is basically your default ranges pre and post flop. So I think it's definitely a good idea to be GTO minded in here in such a way that you have a default game plan which is fairly hard for your opponent to exploit. But then again, when the information becomes available and you start to make decisions and basically play poker, you will get new information for free. So this of course can be anything. It can be meaning that someone opens and everyone folds, so that's of course not going to be useful information. But sometimes you also will see that you get in a river spot and your opponent overbets a river and you feel you have to make the call and he shows you a complete spew. That's obviously going to be very useful information for you in the future. So whatever the information is, I feel you should be really observant about that new information and try to get the most out of that information. And because we are human and the majority of us will not be able to get all the information in your head and know what every opponent did in each pot, I feel it's a very logical next step to make a lot of notes about your opponents and kind of build a track record to see if you can get certain patterns in your opponent's game, if you see certain tendencies or you feel certain leaks. And that all together is what I call player profiling, and I feel that's very important to do in poker, or that is generally my approach to get a player profile as accurate as possible. And that comes with your observations of hands played with your opponent, but also for example hot stats, which you will become more accurate over time when you play poker with your opponents. And of course you can also combine hot stats, observation and notes together to even get a more accurate player profile on your opponent. So once you build your player profile and it becomes more and more accurate, you can start about certain adjustments. And this again can be anything, either playing tighter, playing looser, not follow through with bluffs on the river because he's more the stationary type, making hero calls, making hero faults on the river. It really depends on what kind of player profile you have, and also how accurate your player profile is. So once you know what kind of adjustments you can make, either small adjustments or big adjustments, from there you can start to make a new game plan, and make a new game plan such that it is more profitable game plan and has more profitable strategies than your default game plan. So that is really how I approach poker personally, and also where GTO and exploitative poker fits into my poker game. So to summarize, or the main takeaway is that I feel it makes a lot of sense, and I would definitely encourage all of you to study, build and fine tune your GTO ranges to improve your overall game plan, strategies and understanding of poker. It definitely helped me to becoming a better player in general. But however, I don't think it's a good idea to be ignoring new information which basically becomes available to you for free, and not allowing yourself to possibly pick more profitable strategies against your opponents than your default strategies.